meeting started. So what I had at the October 7th regular meeting of the Roundtable presentation from the San Francisco Airport Noise Office. Staff gave a presentation on the ground-based augmentation system, or GBAS for short, and recommended that this meeting go into some detail and get feedback on the overlay GLS approaches, the noise evaluation, the community flight procedure package contents. The presentation prepared by the airport staff is uploaded to the Roundtable website along with today's agenda. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Paul, Hannah, and the airport staff to give us the presentation.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here to speak with everybody again. I think my last opportunity was maybe over a year and a half ago, specifically on this project. So I've got two things that we plan to share with folks here today in accordance with the agenda that was just outlined. The first is the presentation materials that I have up on the screen right now. Hopefully there isn't too much of a lag between our connections here. The other thing that we'd like to share are some of the noise results that we think are easiest to share with folks at this time from one of our GIS platforms, or Geographic Information System platforms. So at one point in the conversation, I am going to jump out of this presentation and go into the GIS. You'll probably hear me say this a couple of times today during our discussion. Our intention is to make most, if not all, of the materials that we're going to be reviewing today available to members of this technical working group and potentially members of the public.
Hannah,
Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, and through the chair, I just want to point out that we did miss public comment on items not on the agenda before the presentation, which is an agenda item on the agenda that was distributed.
Sorry, I'll pause if you need to take
Yeah,
that.
I'm so sorry about that.
No problem, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to bring myself back up, but thank you, Angela. And yes, I apologize. I don't have that on my, anyway, so let's go back to public comments on non-agenda items. So if any of the members of the public have any public comments, this would be the time to do it. Do we have any members?
Thank you, Chairman Ortiz. I do see 3 hands raised. First, I will call on Mary Jo Fremont, followed by Jennifer Landisman. So Mary Jo, please accept this request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. Yes, Mary Jo Fremont, and my it's a clarifying question. Given that the presentation of GBAS will go into some details, how are we going to be able to ask clarifying questions to make sure that we understand, we, the public and members, understand what Paul is going to be covering? First step is to understand before we can really provide any feedback. Thank you.
Great, and my expectation is that we will open it up after his presentation, and we will open it up for questions. So.
Thank you. I will now call on Jennifer, followed by Mark Scholl. Jennifer, please accept this request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, thank you. It was actually exactly the same question Mary Jo had, and I would like some clarification. Will the questions, will the public be able to participate in a Q&A today? Or you know, what is the format? Because in the description of today's meeting, it just said that we only had the 2 minutes allowed. So how will we be able to ask questions? Is it going to be a fairly open format or restrictive?
It would be limited. It would be limited to public comment like we usually do, which is 2 minutes to ask your question.
Okay, so that means that we'll get one more chance to ask a question after the presentation. And so my comment was actually about the fact that at the last GBAS presentation, it was mentioned that it would be presented to the roundtable and also to the residents of the Bay Area. And I feel it's incumbent upon you to let your neighbors know that these meetings are going on because the residents of the Bay Area are not here. And, you know, I would be happy to publicize these meetings because I don't think the roundtable does. I don't think individual cities are doing. But in order for there to be meaningful engagement on this, we have to have meaningful engagement with the public. And so if it's not the GBAS team, I would like to ask the leaders of the SFO Roundtable to see how we can sort that out, because we do have many questions. We do, you know, we're just as interested in participating and making sure that this goes as planned. And so that, you know, just one more chance to ask a question today is simply not enough, and especially since the public is not here. Thank you.
Okay, and I'd be happy to, if you want to send me an email, then you and I can get in contact, and we can include Michelle and maybe some of the members, some of the staff at the airport, so to answer any questions and to talk about outreach. I think it is a good point that you bring up, so I'd be happy to discuss that.
Thank you, Chairman. And I do have two more hands raised. One is by Mark Scholl, followed by Rob Holbrook. So Mark, please accept this request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. I'm a fan of GBAS, but I have concerns about this plan. As I mentioned last meeting, SFO is introducing .3.
These are for items not on the agenda.
Yeah, this is for items not on the agenda. So if you want to wait and make your comment after the presentation, that's probably more appropriate.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think we got to keep it.
No, it's about GBAS.
Perfect. So we'll just wait till after the presentation and let you do your comments. And we had one more, Angela?
Yes, Rob, please accept this request to unmute your microphone and begin speaking.
Okay, thank you. Yesterday, or maybe it was 2 days ago, the FAA approved the operation of the 737 MAX series again. And I wanted to bring to the attention of the technical working group and more generally to the San Francisco Roundtable, something that I found in the environmental impact report that accompanied the plan to expand San Jose Airport. In the appendix dealing with noise, Appendix J, there was a table that showed the number of acres that were affected on departure and on arrival of various models of airplane, both current and future. And I was disturbed to find that the 737-800, as compared to the 737-8 MAX, which is an airplane class that comprises 30% of the arrivals to San Jose, that the number of acres that are affected at the important noise thresholds, 55, 60, 65 and up, DNL, is double roughly. So that's on arrival. It's a little quieter on departure, but on arrival, which I know this roundtable spent a lot of time on, the number of acres that will be affected at those noise levels for that class of airplane are about double. And the roundtable may want to consider, both here and in a legislative working group, whether or not it would be appropriate to alert the airlines who may be considering purchase decisions of this consideration, because surely this is something that's going to affect us longer term. Thank you for consideration of this point.
Thank you. And if you would mind following up with an email, that would be great, so we could follow up with you and get, I have some questions I'd like to ask you about what you just presented. Okay.
Mr. Holbrook, I'm sorry, if you can also state the city you are calling from really quick for the record.
I live in Mountain View, and so the San Jose expansion is very interesting to me.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chair, we do not have any more hands raised.
Very good. And I apologize for my confusion. So I go back to Mr. Han. I apologize for that, and let's get back to the presentation. Thank you.
Understood. I'm going to share my screen again. And we'll put this back into presentation mode, hopefully. All right, and hopefully everyone can see my screen. As was mentioned, the materials that we're presenting here today, this is, I'm using the PowerPoint version. This was extracted into a PDF for folks. We may have found one small issue, which I'll cover a little bit later, between the PDF version that was uploaded for folks to consider prior to today's meeting and the PowerPoint presentation, which is that we put some labels on certain graphics that maybe didn't make it into the PDF. And I'll address those when we get to that a little bit later. But again, our intention is to share, some, if not all, of the materials that we're going to be presenting here today with members of this technical working group. And one of the first things I'd like to point out is, in addition to how much we appreciate this opportunity to present the latest on what's been happening with the flight procedure considerations for the GBAS project on the airport side, we're very, very interested in learning from this group in particular, what kinds of materials would be ideal for putting in front of the residents of the Bay Area. And one of the terms we use for that is this concept here of a community flight procedure package. And some of the other aspects of this are anything involving feedback on how our graphics look or additional metrics or things of that nature. The timeline that we have for this is dependent on how much time we need to interface with everyone here and other residents. So we are not here to compress our schedule to rush forward and get a handful of interesting and innovative GLS procedures. We want to spend the time to make sure that we've got the right amount of information for everybody here and in the future in the Bay Area residents to make informed decisions and feedback to provide to us about our project and our innovative procedure goals. So please, I hear the initial questions. There's not exactly a specific time limit. There are notional timelines that we'd like to follow. So our agenda for today, as was mentioned, we're going to talk first about the overlay GLS approaches and how those are proceeding relative to the GBAS project. The second portion of today's update that we want to share with folks is really about where we are with the innovative GLS approaches that we'd like to evaluate with members of the community before the airport requests anything for production. Oh, I'm sorry, is there a comment?
I think
Oh,
we'll
no,
need to
I'm sorry.
mute people.
Yeah, please, if everyone can just mute their microphone, except for Paul at the moment, thank you.
Sure thing. Sorry, guys. COVID is a fun experience, start to finish. So then we're going to switch over to the noise evaluation as we have currently been able to bring it forward today. Again, what you see today is really just where as far as we've gotten, and we do anticipate making additional noise evaluation aspects to put in front of folks here in the technical working group. And then we'll, again, just a kind of an open question for folks to keep in mind. We would like to understand what kinds of materials that you're seeing here on the screen, or maybe that you haven't seen yet, would you like to see made available in kind of packages of information that we can make accessible via the Fly SFO website for residents to download a little bit later on, not just yet. We want to get this group's feedback first before we take that important next step. And then again, just any kind of feedback in general about the current status of approaches is what we're after here for today's meeting. The next few slides that I have in the deck are really just a refresher on what the GBAS is and what our project goals are. My intention is to go very quickly through these, not to spend too much time on them, just so that we can get into the more interesting topics relative to the actual GLS approach procedures that are either being developed. Those are the overlay ones or the innovative ones that we'd like to consider. So just really quickly as a refresher, GBAS, it is a airport-owned augmentation system, and what it's augmenting is an aircraft's onboard GPS navigational capabilities. So it's taking something that generally has maybe a half a mile to a mile accuracy, and it's shrinking it down to something that gives it at least the navigational precision of inches to meters. And what that does is, by improving the accuracy of the aircraft's ability to know where it is on Earth, it gives it an autopilot coupling capability, and it produces the opportunity for ILS Category 1 minimums down to 200 feet, a half a mile, and in many cases even lower than that. So this is a way to basically turn the RNAV or GPS navigation on an aircraft into a precision approach. as we've kind of talked about before, just to refresh, our goals here at San Francisco with this project, number one is to try to reduce noise impact to the community. This is being afforded to us through some opportunities to create unique, and we use the term innovative, procedures that could potentially reduce the noise footprint on certain areas of the residents here in the Bay Area. And that's really our number one goal here with investing in this technology. There are other goals like creating redundant ILS capabilities. That's one of the advantages of having a GBAS, is that it gives us a backup system to some of the existing ILSs on the airport. There are other efficiency enhancements that can be had related to the angle of the approach that an aircraft can fly coming in. These are usually very closely related to our first goal in trying to reduce the noise impact, where we're trying to keep aircraft maybe a little bit higher along a more optimal glide path that involves lower thrust usage, and in some cases a cleaner wing. And there's also the aspect of this project to potentially reduce delays. Some of that comes from having a redundant system, especially when we go through extensive periods of construction where we have to turn off the ILS and we may need to rely on the GBAS. Others are from existing programs like the Closely Spaced Parallel Runway Operation, or CASPR, where we will be given the opportunity to add in GLS approaches. So we have more opportunities to achieve kind of those benefits. And just a quick refresher, our commitment here on behalf of the airport project team is, this is an airport-owned nav aid. I just have to emphasize that, which means that the FAA does not contribute any funds to this project. And in fact, the outreach that we're engaged in right now is also purely airport-driven effort. This is not a typical FAA-directed initiative. This is something the airport believes is very important, to make sure that we achieve our number one goal of reducing, noise exposure. The second piece here is that it is our commitment to review these GLS procedures with members of the community, not just with the roundtable here for SFO and the technical working group, but all of our residents to the best of our ability. So that's just a small part of what we're trying to achieve here today. The slide that you see up on the screen here is kind of the beginning of our discussion about the overlay GLS approach procedures, which are currently in production by the FAA. As you've heard us talk about maybe during the full roundtable briefing, there are 4 overlay approaches that are currently being developed. There's 1 to 28 left, an approach to 28 right, an approach to 19 left, and an approach to 19 right. These 4 approaches are based off of the existing RNAV GPS approaches, and specifically, they're based off the LPV minimums. And on the next slide, and I'll maybe just go back and forth here to facilitate folks understanding, these are the 4 RNAV GPS procedures that are being used as the template for the airport's first 4 GLS approach procedures. And they are intended to be identical to everything you see here. So the same waypoints, the same altitudes, the same speed restrictions, the same starting points and connectivity to arrival procedures. And what we've got down here on the bottom of this slide are just a little bit of a refresher to remind folks what the existing procedures look like in terms of some key pieces that we may have some flexibility to change with our more innovative exploration. So as an example here, you'll notice that the 19 right straight in approach procedure today has a glide path angle. That's the angle that the aircraft is going to follow between the final approach point and crossing the threshold of the runway. That's a little bit higher than standard. It's 3.15 degrees, and the approach to 19 left is 3 degrees. This was done in part to facilitate the opportunity to use both approaches in the closely spaced parallel runway operation, and that's something that will be carried over to the GLS overlay, so it's identical. For the 2/8s, the starting procedures, again, just to keep them identical, is that the overlay approach for 2/8 left will be the lower 2.85 degrees, and the approach to 2/8 right will be the standard 3.00 degrees. You'll see 2 other kind of pieces of information that we've shared. We call this phrase today, opportunity. That's just our way of describing the opportunity for these procedures to be used based on historical weather conditions at the airport. So as may come as no surprise, based on the past several years worth of historical weather data, there's been about 95% of all operations conducted, approach operations conducted to the 2.8s. There's roughly a 5% likelihood of operations occurring to the 19s. And then there's almost a statistically 0%, but they do occasionally happen, opportunity for approaches to happen to the 10s and the 1s. The other thing we're tracking here is which procedures we do anticipate being part of the closely spaced parallel runway operation. So the GLS overlay approaches for 2.8 left and 2.8 right, they are intended to go in. They are currently being analyzed to ensure that they meet the safety separation standards. And the analysis is being done by the FAA at the national level, and they're going to bring the results of that back. There's also an analysis going on right now for the GLS version of the approaches to 19 left and 19 right. So we have that as TBD, or to be determined. We don't have the final answer on that just yet here today. I'm backing up one page just to speak to two more critical aspects about the overlay GLS procedures. So the first is that these procedures are what's called hard dated for publication on the 7th of October, 2021. And a lot of what's happening with the GBAS project behind the scenes is ensuring that we have all of the groundwork completed. We have the station established, the flight inspection completed, so that when the GBAS comes online, the approach procedures are ready to go, and the flight inspection for the procedures and the GBAS all happens on exactly the same time. If the GBAS runs a little bit behind schedule, the actual installation of the GBAS, what you can expect to see is that the flight procedures would still be published on the 7th of October, but they will be not available, which means that no aircraft would be capable of flying them until such time that the nav aid actually gets online and becomes commissioned. One other key aspect is that the FAA conducts its own environmental analysis for procedures that it produces and maintains, these 4 overlay approach procedures, and all of the innovative procedures we're going to talk about in just a few moments. Are being developed by the FAA, so they go through their own environmental screening process. At this time, as of the 3rd quarter of 2019, we understand that the FAA has issued a categorical exclusion for the overlay procedures based primarily on the concept that they are identical to existing RNF approach procedures.
Excuse me, Paul. When this is published, are we going to actually have this in language the public can understand, or are we going to continue to use these acronyms?
Sorry, just to clarify, are you referring to the use of the acronyms?
You said these were going to be published October 7th, 2021.
Yes, sir.
Okay, right now you're used in this one page, you have what? GBAS, GPS, Caltex, and LPV, RNAV. Okay, every one of those would be Greek to the average person on the street. If this is supposed to be helping the community and being informative to our communities, that needs to go, and you need to actually, or at least put in some sort of guide as to what all these acronyms mean. So will this be user friendly in October 7th, 2021?
So just to take your suggestion, I think the goal is that the Fly SFO webpage, which is not, this is not the link to it here, will have a list of all the acronyms that we use when we refer to our instrument procedures. And so if that's not already developed, that's something that we can take the action item to make sure we have developed there as residents work to interpret, hopefully not too hard, some of the upcoming changes to the procedures. What you see on the right-hand side of the screen, just to be clear though, is we just wanted to provide this link because that is the FAA's portal where any member of the public can track the production of the flight procedures and how they're coming along. But I think it's a great suggestion, and it's one we can take back to at a minimum, make sure we have more of these terms and acronyms spelled out on our webpage for the public.
It's already there, Paul and Mr. O'Neill. It's all there. We'll be happy to give you the link.
Thanks, Bert. sorry, so just to continue forward. So I was just kind of speaking about the environmental screening process. So just want to make sure that it's understood by folks participating here today. The FAA has determined again that the 4 overlay approaches that are being developed by the FAA have been issued a categorical exclusion. So there are no additional pieces of environmental analysis that are understood to be accomplished by the FAA at this time for the overlay procedures. So that's why they are set to be published on the 7th of October. And now there is a wild card at play, which is COVID-19. Unfortunately, has had a tremendous impact on the FAA resource availability, in particular for flight inspection related activities. If the FAA finds itself in another crunch, or if there's some completely unpredictable thing like another partial or total government shutdown or something of that nature, it is possible that some of these dates may slip because these are not under the airport's control. The only thing we on the airport side can control is the installation of the GBAS, prior to the 7th of October, and then hope the FAA is able to match their hard dated commitment.
You have
So again,
another hand raised by a member of the committee, and W, I think's hands raised.
Happy to take
Ann
the question.
S, I'm sorry, Ann S.
I can go forth. Paul, just a simple question. On 19 arrivals, they're then going to have to taxi quite a bit. I know that GBAS isn't looking at ground-based noise, but I'd just like all of you to consider all of that time on the taxiways puts those jet engines pointed to a couple of my neighborhoods and possibly into Burlingame and Hillsborough. I'm guessing, but
so yeah,
you're going to have to go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, to your point, I'll just elaborate on one thing. We are not doing any kind of ground-based noise analysis. However, as you'll see when we get to
Paul.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I still there?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Yes.
Okay. Uh-oh.
And
Well,
can you hear him?
I can hear him. He cut out for a little bit, but you're good to go.
okay, thank you. As you'll see when we get into our noise analysis, we are looking at notional thrust reverser usage in our analysis that we're prepared to share today with folks, and certainly in the future. But that's kind of the extent of the noise analysis we prepared, because it's very difficult for us from where our project kind of starts and stops to look at any of the taxi operations that would result after that.
Thank you.
So just moving forward onto, I'm on page 8, if folks are also tracking on the PDF that was downloaded. There have been some changes that we are trying to track with these overlay procedures specifically. The first one, which I'm sure is no surprise to many of the participants here, are the possible changes to the surfer arrival. In many respects, I think the folks who are participating here may have excellent, if not better, insight into what is occurring with potential changes to Surfer. From the very limited perspective of the GBAS project, we are focused on 2 things: when that procedure may become published, and the second piece is what may happen to the location of EDDYY. The reason why we're very interested in that is because we're looking at approaches that begin at EDDYY, and we want to make sure that when we share potential noise contours with residents and yourselves, that we're using the right location. So for now, because there is not a timeline for publication on the Surfer 5, we're going to use the existing EDDYY location just so that there's consistency between a lot of the materials that we've produced. When the Surfer 5 does get a publication date in the gateway, it is our plan to update everything relative to that new location of EDDYY. And if it's a suggestion from this group, we're happy to keep kind of the current and the future at the same time. But right now, because we don't have a timeline for the Surfer 5 production based on the IFP gateway, we're just kind of tracking it, and we're using today's location of EDDYY as our starting point for analysis. A second piece that's changed on the overlay approaches since 2018, when we last had a chance to brief this group, there were 5 overlay approaches that we had requested the FAA to develop. One of them was the LDA approach to 28 right, which is one of the approaches that was used traditionally for precision runway monitoring, or the PRM operation, or SOIA. Sorry, I'm just throwing a lot of acronyms out there. But the reason why I'm not going to explain too much about it is because the precision runway monitoring system has been disassembled at the airport, and the LDA that was going to be the basis for this particular approach has been decommissioned. An additional challenge we discovered is that the FAA was not prepared at this time to develop GLS approaches for such an extreme offset from the runways. There may be a time in the future where they're ready to take that step, but at this time, based on our goal of trying to get the GBAS up and operational and start getting members of the air traffic and airline community familiar with its use at San Francisco, we were asked to set this one aside. So we're no longer pursuing the LDA approach as an overlay option. There is another piece that I would just want to mention. It's a little bit tangential, I think, to today's conversation, and we can go into it in more detail if there's an interest. There, as a part of the study being conducted at the national level for using the 19 left and 19 right approach procedures, I'm just going to back up one page, in a CASPER operation, there is a possibility that the MIST approach may need to be modified over what is shown here today. So today's MIST approaches for 19 right and 19 left are relatively straightforward with a climb. The aircraft, if they need to execute a MIST, they go to the end of the runway first. They climb to a certain altitude. If they've already gotten there, that's okay. They can turn. If they need to gain a bit more altitude, then they climb to that altitude and they execute a turn direct to one of these two locations in the Bay Area. The concept is that for maximum safety of operations, in a very unusual circumstance where one or both aircraft loses communications and air traffic isn't able to give them vectors for separation, there's an analysis that's performed to make sure that these two, if an aircraft were flying both one on 19 left, one on 19 right, they don't want them to inadvertently get too close to one another if they couldn't speak to air traffic. And there's a possibility to change the MIST approach design to better facilitate that no communication aircraft separation specifically for this. So that's something we're tracking as a part of our GBAS project. If we get additional insight and information about the FAA's decision to potentially make a change, we're very happy to bring that back to this technical working group and let folks know what we learn in the process. So I think that's what I have on the overlays, if there's folks that have questions.
Mr. Chairman, Al Royce, I had a question relating back to follow up to what Ann's question was. I'm a little concerned, and I'm not sure I understood the response, but one of the primary objectives was to reduce the noise overall, but there's a possibility that ground-based noise would be increased. I'd like to understand exactly to what extent, and if that's a real possibility or if that's only immaterial.
Okay, and the question I think had to do with the time the aircraft spend on the runways,
Tarmac. Yes,
or the tarmac,
yes.
after they land, is my understanding. So is that what the question you're asking?
Well, either landing or departure, but is there any increase in ground-based noise resulting from the implementation of the GBAS system?
Okay, because and again, I'm correct me if I'm mistaken, but the way I'm seeing this, we're talking about arrival procedures. So these would not impact the time that aircraft that are departing spend on the tarmac. Is that correct? Right.
Is that
okay.
correct?
Bert gave me a thumbs up.
Okay,
so
good.
The question is, and that's what I'm clarifying, Al, so that we're all on the same page.
Yep.
So the question is, will these procedure changes impact the amount of time that the arriving flights spend on the tarmac?
Yeah, I just want assurance that the ground-based noise from the implementation of these procedures, which would be while they're on the tarmac, has not increased to any significant extent.
But Al, what I'm trying to get is a response from our team, from the airport team, is my sense is that the change in these arrival procedures would not increase the amount of time spent on the tarmac by the arriving flight. So if somebody could confirm that, I thought I saw Bert nod.
We don't expect any changes to the current, over the current, no.
So,
okay.
So as far as GBAS and changing arrival procedures, we don't expect that there would be any increase in noise from tarmac operations.
I also heard the consultant say that he was not doing a ground-based noise analysis, as it was not part of his scope of work.
This is
Correct,
correct, but we do not expect to see any difference over current operations.
yeah, so once these airplanes, regardless of what happens on the air, in the air, once they reach the ground, it doesn't change much. Got it. Okay. Al, you're good with that?
If Paul, I assume that's the correct answer. You agree with what Bert said? If so, I'm good with it. That was my question.
Thank you, sir.
I absolutely do. And again, in terms of the overlay approaches, which we're discussing right now, they are in all senses identical. So for good or bad, whatever you're experiencing today would be what you experience, come 7th of October for an aircraft that flies the GLS version of one of the 4 approaches on the screen here today.
Great.
Through
Thank
the
you.
chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, before we get too far away, I'm trying to pull up mentally the map of the various taxiways. So if you've got a flight coming in on 19, is it going to need the entire runway to slow down and stop? In which case it would taxi right next to there's a taxiway, and I don't remember if it's A, B, C, or D, versus there's also a taxiway that they could turn off sooner to get towards the terminals. And I would imagine that's a function of how much speed the plane has coming in.
Okay, so just so I understand your question, you're concerned, you're saying because they're coming in steeper, they're going to be coming in faster and they're going to have to use more of the runway than they're using today.
No, absolutely no. Good point, Chair Ortiz. I'm just curious because we've never really dived into how much time planes stand on the tarmac in various locations. And I don't know if a 19 arrival will allow them to turn off before they get all the way to the end. Obviously, it's airplane safety on that. It's just something to keep in mind because my totally unofficial perception is if the plane turned onto a taxiway without going all the way to the end, we might not get blasted by that low frequency noise when the planes are right next to 101.
Okay, and so, but what our question has to do with the change in procedure. So the question is, will this change in procedure necessitate the use of the full runway or a much larger portion of the runway, or is it going to be similar to what the current procedures are?
Well done, Chair Ortiz. Yes.
For the amount of runway used, it is a function of safety and the speed of the aircraft. Let's silence that for the moment. And so the aircraft will take every advantage to get off the runway as soon as possible. So open taxiways, available taxiways for exiting the runway will be used. Now, when it gets to the point of an aircraft doing a steeper approach, yes, they may end up using more runway. Does it mean they're going to go and use every single inch of it? Not necessarily. So would they be at the fence line? Doubt it. Typically on these, the reason we're using these is because of strong winds, and I mean strong. They would typically end up using less runway.
I agree, Bert. I also think with every fire, when we started getting those big dust particulate clouds, run 19 was used more often to arrive. But I think that's also because the fires were so huge, planes had to be moved around those fire zones, but I have no idea. But I know I'm usually happy with a 19. A 19 arrival sounds really good.
Well, and again,
yeah, I would think you would like 19.
And again, if we're doing the steeper arrival, then we're helping anyway. It's a little bit of here, a little bit of there. So it doesn't sound like the change in the taxiing on the tarmac is going to be very material. So we will move on. I thank you, Council or Vice Mayor Schneider.
Excuse me, through the chair, I would just like to note to the members of the public, because I do see some hands raised, and just acknowledge that we are not taking public comment at the moment, but we will call your name once we open public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Okay, we could go forward.
So that's the material we have on the overlay approaches. Again, those were the 4 procedures that are currently being developed by the FAA that are hard dated to be published on the 7th of October, barring other circumstances, that are difficult for us to see. And again, if the GBAS is not operational on the 7th of October for reasons that are within the airport's control, the procedures would still be published. There'll just be no TAM to be unusable to air traffic and flight crews until such time that the GBAS is operational. So now I'd like to switch over and talk about where we are with innovative approach procedure concepts. And right now, I made a small correction. I think the handout we said there were 8. We're actually down to 7. And as we presented at the full roundtable, we've been given some opportunity to explore GLS approaches that actually take advantage of just a little bit of room in the current air traffic system to achieve a higher altitude and hopefully a more optimized approach profile, starting at the beginning of the approach all the way down to the runway. So we haven't been given maximum creativity. Like we're not being permitted to engage in this GBAS project as a part of a PBN full working group, just to use that phrase, or a performance-based navigation full working group. That's the new vehicle that the FAA uses to try to look at all sorts of approach and airspace procedure changes at the same time. We have been given some very limited windows of opportunity to connect our slightly higher glide path angled GLS approaches to carry those higher altitude gains kind of backwards up along the approaches to the starting points. But I'm sure, as many of you are aware, the starting point of the approach is fixed in many cases, and we can't modify those altitudes, in particular ARCHI and EDDYY. So those are at the moment at a fixed altitude and a fixed speed because they have to connect to arrival procedures. So what we've come up with so far, and I'm sorry, this is not correct, it is 7 innovative GLS procedures. The reason why it was 8 is because we were going to request Cat 2 minimums on one of the procedures, which would have made it an 8th. What happens with the FAA is if you ask for an ILS or a GLS approach to Category 1, that's one kind of procedure. If you ask for a Category 2 approach, it's a slightly different kind of procedure, in particular the way the MIST approach is constructed. So that was the difference between 7 and 8, and we'll maybe talk about that in just a little bit. So what happened though for us to go from 23 down to 7 is that we split things into kind of 2 groups. One of the groups is the innovative GLS procedures that all of the folks working on the project team here at the airport have high confidence can be achieved in the next 5 years. And what that means is the FAA's design criteria supports it, the current air traffic constraints support it, the current aircraft technology supports it. Then the other 16 or so approach procedures, they're not gone. They're just going into a second group. And it's the intention of the airport to continuously look for more of these opportunities to use the GBAS to achieve our project goals. So I just want to kind of paint that picture that while we are about to talk about the innovative procedure concepts that we've developed so far for evaluation with folks, it's not the end of the discussion. And we really want to get that feedback from everybody here and other residents about other ideas that could be explored, perhaps as part of a Group 2 initiative, or maybe even as slight tweaks or modifications to what we're seeing here today. So I'm going to jump in here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the kind of 7 GLS approach procedure concepts using the kind of layout that you see on the screen. For those of you that heard at the beginning of the conversation that there was a difference between the PDF that was made available and the PowerPoint, this is it right here. These graphics for some reason did not make it into the PDF. So on some of the procedure pages, we added a box right here to attempt to elaborate about how much higher certain points along the approaches have been raised when we convert kind of an existing approach into an innovative GLS concept. But I'm going to explain kind of what you're seeing on this slide, because we're going to use this format, at least for today, to express some of the aspects of how we wanted to review things. So up in the top left corner, you're seeing an image from Google Earth. with a KMZ file. This is actually taken from the FAA's Targets platform that we have permission to use for this project. Targets is one of the instrument procedure development tools available for the FAA that is used for these kinds of projects. You'll see the kind of locations of certain waypoints, and you'll see kind of the altitudes that the aircraft would be anticipated to fly coming along different transitions towards the runway. The three different colors that are traditionally used from the Targets platform, the red here is the final approach segment, the white here is the intermediate approach segment, and the blue is the initial approach segment. All of this comprises essentially one approach procedure, although technically it's one approach procedure coming from two different directions, but it's published kind of as one approach. The part that the GBAS is directly influencing is this tiny red line. And that's based on today's limitations. A GBAS can do more than that. But for what the FAA permits GBASs to be used for in the United States right now, it is only the final approach segment. And so we have the opportunity to increase that altitude, and then we can work backwards up the approach procedure to connect things back up to EDDYY here in this particular example, and ARCHI, where we no longer have any flexibility about altitudes in particular. So the first, that's kind of what you're seeing up here. Again, the green boxes are
Sorry,
just.
could you point out where EDDYY is? I'm having trouble reading it.
I'm
Okay,
terribly
thank you.
sorry. Yeah, I was afraid about the screen resolution. And when we jump over to the other platforms, like this is static, but when we get to the screen share portion, then we can explore in more detail.
Great, no,
So
thank you.
sure. So this is EDDYY here. On the right-hand side, this is what we call a flight inspection graphic. If you're a pilot, it would probably be called an approach plate. It's essentially the same thing. The subtle distinction is that a flight inspection graphic is only used for purposes of flight inspection. And that is intentional because we do want to offer to make this kind of information available to the public from the FlySFO website, but of course it cannot be used to actually fly an airplane. You'll see the not for navigational use phraseology in here. This is just to help folks who would like to explore these potential procedures in perhaps a flight simulator or something of that nature. This is much closer to what they would need to execute that kind of analysis on their own. So EDDYY here, which is here on the procedure, is here. Here's ARCHI kind of on this neck of the woods, and this is ARCHI here on the flight inspection graphic. The other information that we've included down here just for today's discussion is, again, this discussion about the glide path angle. So as you recall from our, the current glide path angle for 28 left is 2.85 degrees. We're being given the opportunity to consider as an innovative procedure to increase that up to 3.20. It doesn't sound like much. It actually results in, this is where the 200-foot gain is coming from. So the aircraft would be fully configured to land and 200 feet higher when they cross DUYET, which is the final approach fix. That's the beginning of the last portion of the approach before they land. The opportunity, again, because this is an approach to 28 left, to use this innovative procedure is in the 95 percentile range, which just means that the winds typically favor this direction of operation at the airport. And so there's a very high chance for a pilot that's GLS trained and an aircraft that's GLS capable to use this innovative concept. And I think we've covered the other pieces. So this is the kind of information just for today that I wanted to share on the 28 left one. I'm going to go through the same kind of information here for the next opportunity, which is 28 right. And this is again on page 11. So same information now. 28 right had more opportunities to increase the altitudes that kind of work backwards up the approach to the points that we aren't allowed to change. Again, we can't change EDDYY. We can't change ARCHI. But the way that the current procedures are constructed to 28 right, we have more opportunities to increase the altitudes in search of that optimal descent profile that potentially reduces noise and also even potentially reduces fuel burn and emissions. So we're still only about 200 feet higher when we're very, very close to the airport, but in other cases we're almost 1,100 feet higher in terms of what the procedure is encoded as at side by, and we're still several hundred feet higher as we kind of work backwards up the approach towards the east side of the bay here. So again, these first two innovative concepts, They have the same waypoints that exist today, so the same kind of lateral path. The only thing that we've changed is we've just made them all a little bit steeper and a little bit higher above residential areas. The next innovative GLS procedure that we're considering is what we call the down the bay approach to runway 28 right. Now, there's two interesting things about this particular procedure. The first is that this is in fact an approach profile that is flown today into the airport when aircraft are arriving on the Bodega 3 arrival, and they're given the east down the bay path. So today, there are aircraft that fly this particular innovative procedure through the use of vectors given by the TRACON to the aircraft. Or the arrivals, the aspect of air traffic control that just handles kind of how the aircraft get into the tower handoff. So this is 11,000 feet, almost 2 miles above the surface, coming in over downtown. And then the aircraft come out over the bay. We're around 6,000 feet, so about a mile up in here. This is Oakland. So you can see the airport on this side. And part of the goal of this procedure is to somewhat keep aircraft separated from Oakland, but keep them very, very high so that departing aircraft from the ones essentially go underneath them. That's part of the intention of this design. And I do want to point out the project team has been working with representatives from the TRACON, with representatives from the tower to bring these concepts here in front of you. So the ones we're showing you have gone through at least the beginnings of air traffic vetting, and there is a belief that they can be used in a day-to-day operation. So, and again, because this is an approach to 28 right, there's a very good likelihood this would be used. Now, this is a slightly unique procedure because we're combining several different navigation modes. So this is actually an RNP leg, which means the aircraft is going to precisely fly this arc between this new waypoint that doesn't exist over here, and they're going to fly this arc essentially over primarily, not completely, but primarily the protected marine areas in this neck of the woods until they line up at CPIN, which is the existing intermediate approach. We do still have some opportunities to increase altitude here. This is currently set to the 200-foot gain that we're looking for. Right now, the procedure that had been evaluated only has a 300-foot gain here. It could go to 400, but this actually is still being tweaked by some of the representatives working directly on the project team to make sure that we're not setting aircraft up for a very steep, kind of noisy arc into CPIN. The other small thing I'll point out is you'll notice here that we don't have a name for this waypoint. There is a waypoint in this area named Cork, C-O-R-K-K. That's this thing right here. The TRACON has indicated to us that they have difficulty clearing aircraft from established arrivals to Cork. And so they said the only way that we could successfully get an approach like this to be used on a regular basis is if we made a new waypoint for the start of this approach procedure that isn't Cork. So very, very subtle distinction, but I know there are representatives here in this working group that have dealt with these challenges for years. So I just wanted to share that information on this particular procedure. The next approach procedure that we're evaluating is a direct overlay of the existing RNP Yankee approach to 28 right. There really isn't anything that we're trying to do that's super elaborate, I think, in terms of the GBAS affected portion. So this procedure exists today. We don't have a lot of opportunities to change things further upstream just yet. However, the concept here is that there's a very, very short final approach segment, which is the red up here, shorter than all the other innovative GLS procedure concepts we're using. And we've color coded this right now into orange. And I'm sorry if it's very small and difficult for folks to see, but we have the KML files. We can make them available to folks if you're interested. We have these RF legs here. These are not controlled by the GBAS. This is kind of a very specific capability that the aircraft and the flight crew would have to be trained on and be able to execute. Now, the good news is that almost all, if not 100%, but I'm just going to reserve that there could be some new folks coming into the GLS operations picture that don't have this capability. But at this point, it's like 99% of aircraft have the capability to fly RF legs in the final and connect to the GLS. That being said, the criteria to do this by the FAA is emerging. It doesn't exist right this second. So this procedure obviously exists, but the concept of flying this kind of approach and then jumping onto a GLS right here, that's only about 2 miles long, that's very new. And it's something that's being worked on at the request of our project team to see if this is one that we can add to our GLS innovative procedure concepts. So I'll just keep going. The other, I think, kind of exciting one that is maybe a new addition to folks who've been tracking this project for a while is the concept of looking at converting the existing FMS bridge visual into a GLS approach. Now this one is, this is a great approach, we think, in terms of potential, reduction in noise exposure. The the challenge is that from a criteria perspective, there's a reason why the FMS bridge visual is called what it is, and it's not an actual instrument approach procedure today. And so what we're doing to convert a visual approach procedure into an actual instrument approach procedure that allows autopilot coupling down to the runway to potentially standard Category 1 minimums is we're making some very small tweaks and modifications to some of these approach points here over the water. In particular, for those of you who are super familiar with the FMS bridge visual, we're going to be introducing the use of a new waypoint, which is GBAS. I'm probably mispronouncing it. The idea being that today's FMS bridge visual goes from Side-by to Janie, and there's no waypoint in between the two. And what we learned from some of the representatives from the TRACON is there are some aircraft that fly the visual approach procedure, but then they make a very early turn heading for SAML into the final approach. And what happens when you make an early turn from here is you start kind of meandering over additional residential areas that maybe weren't intended. So the idea is to make that a little bit more precise relative to the constraints that we'd hope from instrument procedure design and introduce the use of the GBAS waypoint. It's currently being used by, I think, a helicopter approach procedure developed by Hughes for another airport or hospital somewhere in the Bay Area. And if this was a concept that that folks from the Bay, like residents and people participating today, felt would be good to take forward, the FAA would take over maintenance of that particular waypoint, and this would be what it looks like. Now, I've got 2 pages for this one. This is what it looks like when you're coming from EDDYY, and this is what it looks like when you're coming from ARCHI. Again, the only difference between these 2 pages is that this is the EDDYY, the starting point for the GLS version of the FMS bridge visual. This is the ARCHI starting point. So the approach plate is actually really difficult to construct because we are right on the edge of kind of standard FAA design criteria. But at this point, what you're seeing does pass criteria, and we're kind of excited to share it with everybody to see if it's something that should be carried forward in our innovative group. The last 2 innovative procedures that I want to share are GLS approaches to the TENS. Now, there's a number of things that I want to point out about what we're currently looking at and want to explore with residents here. The first thing that I want to point out is that these approaches to the TENS, so let me back up a half step. Approaches to the TENS in general, and I'm happy to pass the microphone to other representatives from the airport, are extremely rare. They're extremely rare today. They will still be extremely rare tomorrow because they would only ever be used in a situation where the winds were blowing so strongly from the southeast, so blowing this way. So you're talking about a rather significant storm event, to the point that the crosswinds were being exceeded on the 19s, and there was some kind of situation where aircraft needed to land on the 10s. I think when we were looking at historical usage numbers, I think this happens anywhere from 0 times per year up to 3 times per year. And I don't mean days, I mean like flights. It's a very seldom used approach. another part of the reason why this is, approaches to the 10s are seldom used is because there is a historical problem from existing TERPS criteria in getting the lowest possible minimums and maintaining autopilot coupling on a GLS approach all the way down to the runway. And that's that there's a little bit of terrain right in this neck of the woods that if you fly straight at the runway, makes the minimums or how low you can fly the approach towards the runway so high that it isn't terribly usable anymore. So the idea is that this approach that you see here can be used down to 250 feet above the runway. And what we mean by that is that the autopilot can safely bring the aircraft all the way down, to very close to the runway so that the pilot operating in this challenging condition would have an opportunity to land and roll out. So again, a low likelihood of this being used, but high value to the handful of flights that have that kind of critical need to for weather related reasons make a landing on the 10s. However, to do this, we did have to make a change to the way that the procedure designed so that it is not an overlay. And what we do for this is we offset the final approach course by 3 degrees. And I'll show you this in Google Earth here when we switch to the screen share portion, but it's 3 degrees north of the center line. And so it would not be considered as an overlay approach. It would be a unique and therefore innovative kind of concept for us. So this is what it looks like on kind of the 10 right aspect. And this is what it looks like on the 10 left side if we were to do that as well. The one on 10 right, we do have a little bit of an opportunity to increase the altitude. So you see here, we can get about 100 feet higher at the start of the final approach. We actually have opportunities to get much higher out here over the water, but I didn't think that'd be interesting for a noise discussion. For 10 left, we do not have that opportunity. And I'll reserve there's some technical reasons related to the visual aids about why we're not trying to pursue that from our exploration here with folks. But suffice it to say, 10 left, there is no opportunity to increase the glide path angle because of the nature of the offset approach. So those are our group 1 innovative procedures. I just want to quickly point out, as I mentioned before, there's an entire second group of innovative procedures that we have that we've considered kind of here on the project team that we're not going to review here today because we don't think they're either not mature enough to review with folks, or the criteria isn't there yet for the procedure development, or there's air traffic conflicts. So some of those, as an example, include category 2 minimums added to the GLS approaches. There's one that we're really a little disappointed in, and it's just disappointment that things can't move faster from our project team perspective. There had been a lot of work attempting to make an RNP to GLS approach to 19 right in particular for those 5% of the conditions where landings on the 19s would need to be made, and we could not, as a working with our TRACON representatives, find a way for that approach to be used basically with safe aircraft separation. So there are other enabling technologies that will need to come into effect here in the Bay Area before we could move forward with some of these ideas. There's also the more exciting concepts related to things that only a GBAS can do, like the virtually displaced threshold concept, which would open up a much broader range of possible opportunities for us to reduce noise over residential areas. The FAA's just not quite ready for that yet. This is being demonstrated in Europe right now, but even ICAO is working on the criteria necessary for this. So we are not going to lose sight of this capability. It's just not something we think we can get to in the next 5 years. So those are the innovative procedure concepts that we want to review with folks. And what I was going to do is just set up a little bit about the noise aspect and then jump over to screen share. If that's okay with folks, where possibly Justin, if you've got a moment from HMMH, might be able to speak to something. But I'm just going to set the stage here for what folks can expect to see from the noise portion, and then I'll maybe hand over the microphone briefly. So what we've done for today is we are running the FAA Aviation Environmental Design Tool version 3C. That is the latest version. It's an FAA tool, but it's used internationally. There's a number of different ways you can run this tool to generate noise analysis. You can run it in the way that kind of traditional DNL or CNEL contours are put together, where you get kind of these composite looks at lots of different aircraft operations, departures, arrivals, etc. And then there's another way you can run it, where you can look at single flights, just one aircraft making one approach. And we felt that that might be the best method to review some of our findings here with residents and with the technical working group. So that's kind of our starting point for today, is looking at single flights using two different metrics. One of them is the LA max, and the other one is the SEL. And that's where I may use, Justin, your more in-depth knowledge on how to differentiate those. The rest of this is really just kind of speaking to it. But if you want to go ahead and elaborate, I'm happy to pass the mic.
Oh, sure. Yeah, not a problem. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So LA max is a weighted portion of the maximum noise level. So the highest noise level of the event is considered LMAX. SEL is a sound exposure level. It is has a duration component. So what it does is it takes an aircraft event and, you know, from start to finish above a certain threshold, it takes all that energy and compresses it into a 1 second duration. So the event as it occurred, instead of over, say, 20 seconds, is the event as it occurred over 1 second. So it's typically louder or a higher level than LMAX, because you're compressing all that energy into a 1 second duration, which it's sort of like, right, the same as LMAX. It's a 1 second highest noise level value. Whereas SEL, you know, you're doing the same thing, but you're taking all the energy over the entire event. So both of those metrics are, I would say, considered supplemental metrics that can be utilized on something similar to this for analysis. Hopefully that makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin. And so what we've done is we're looking at possible changes in the noise kind of boundary at 5 dBA increments using the LMAX, which is just this one up here on the top left is an example of the LMAX. And again, I'm going to jump into a screen share so we can all explore these in a lot more detail. So the idea is that when you see green, that is a kind of a reduction in the total area between the innovative GLS procedure concept and the closest equivalent to that procedure. When you see purple, and if you have color blindness issues, it may not look purple. We're working hard to try to be compliant for the broadest stakeholder group here in the Bay. When you see purple, that actually might be a small expansion. And, you know, it's our goal here on the project team to share our most accurate technical understanding of what these changes could look like with everybody here, so that we can either modify things or get feedback if these don't look like a good idea for pursuit. And if they don't, they are not going to be pursued. So with that, I'm going to jump into kind of the screen share aspect of today's update. So I've got two different pieces. The first is I'm now showing or sharing from our GIS platform. Again, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, this information can be made available to members of the public. I don't know how many members of the public love to explore GIS, but we have these kinds of things available so they can be shared here in a GIS style platform, or we can also share things here in our kind of Google Earth setup. So again, those images that we saw before, this is again the 3-dimensional look. I'm starting with the 2-8 right innovative procedure, which again just involves slightly higher altitudes. And I'm gonna click around a little bit. This is maybe not the best use of time, but hopefully it's valuable insight, at least for today, for folks to get a sense of what we're looking at. So you're looking at the LA Max. So again, this, as Justin was pointing out, this is just the loudest sound that would be anticipated. And the green areas show, potential positive shifts, and the purple show potential negative shift. So this is specifically for the transition from EDDY. If we were to turn off EDDY and see what it looks like from ARCHI, it looks a little bit more like this. And in this interesting example, and we wanted to kind of point this one out, so this is the 50 dBA LMAX kind of area. So what this is suggesting is that today, and I can explain why, aircraft are coming in at 7,000 feet at ARCHI, they go 6,000 at Xyled, 5,000 at GER, 4,000 at Dumba, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is an example where the group that's working on preparing these concepts for consideration with the folks here today, we were attempting to keep the aircraft a little bit higher at Xyled, or Xyled, I'm sorry, I don't know how it's pronounced, at something closer to like 6,800 feet. So that does set you up for more advantageous noise situations, especially for the higher dBA levels as you get closer and closer to the airport. But the result of that is that it does potentially expand the 50 dBA LMAX out a little bit, because the aircraft is a little bit more shallow than what would be expected today. At least that's what we're seeing from the current noise results. If we were to look at this from the SEL perspective, again, so I was showing LMAX before. This is the same procedure from EDDY using SEL. So again, we can see some of these very small differences kind of right at the start of the approach procedure based on how we're looking at initial energy management. Sorry, that's not the right one. And then I can do that for ARCHI as well. So that's what it looks like in terms of ARCHI for this particular example. So this, at least at a first glance, doesn't maybe look like the best outcome. This is also an example where we, as a group, have the ability to trade certain gains here for reducing our potential increased exposure here by modifying the altitude at Xyled. And this is the kind of feedback that we'd like to start by working with this technical working group first to get that kind of feedback and analysis, maybe before we put things out in front of the broader public. So there's all sorts of chances to maybe kind of trade one on this side for this side. But you can see the gains as we get a little bit closer and closer to the airport. And I know there have been some comments about ground-based noise. We are modeling, today's analysis is narrow-body aircraft. That's what we're kind of displaying. We are not permitted to be explicit about which aircraft you're seeing. That is a condition of the use of BOTA 4. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of different contours bumping around on here right now. I was gonna try to make that just a little bit cleaner. Let's turn off that one. That'll make it a bit cleaner. Which should have made it a little bit cleaner. So the idea is all the narrow body aircraft that we're modeling, we are assuming that there is some kind of thrust reverser usage upon their initial landing and rollout. So it does kind of show us if there would be potentially different touchdown points that result in different areas of thrust reverser usage. That's what these broader areas are kind of in this neck of the woods from the SEL perspective. Again, if we bump back to LMAX just to look at the same thing, I'm going to turn off SEL. Much smaller footprint, but again, you can kind of see the differences here. We were fascinated, just to be completely honest with everyone. AEDT, which is the tool, using the BOTA 4 data set, which is the latest kind of noise and performance model available to the international community to do work like this. It hasn't been used extensively yet in a lot of public projects. BOTA 4 cannot at this time be used for DNL analysis. It also cannot be used for CNEL analysis. it can be used for these situations where we'd like to explore a single event kind of flight procedure. So we're excited to do this, but you know, it was very fascinating to us, even between 2018 and 2019, and where we are today, that you know we can see these kinds of energy trades. Some of them are related to our choices for altitudes. Some of them are related to the speeds that we're assuming that these narrow body aircraft might be operating. Suffice it to say, there's a lot of capability now that we have, and you know, our ability to modify small portions and bring those results back to this particular technical working group is very high as an extension of our project. So that's kind of a look at 2.8 right. Again, if again, I'll turn Eddie back on. So, you know, at a first glance, you know, things look very interesting, but it really just depends on which metric you'd like to look at versus, you know, the LA max versus the SEL. And again, I'll turn Eddie back on just to show something closer to home. Again, we do have some small energy trade opportunities to potentially improve, you know, maybe decrease the improvement in this area here over Palo Alto and East Palo Alto, still make an improvement, but then make sure that we're not introducing any unintentional noise kind of behind the waypoint. I'll show some other examples. Go ahead.
Michelle, you went back on mute, but I think it's that Justin's hand is raised as well as Ange Snyder.
Go ahead.
Justin or me? Who would you like first? Go ahead, Justin.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I wasn't sure. So Paul, thank you for these graphics. I wanted to touch on the purple areas first. You said that it's due to a more shallow condition, I believe you said. Can you explain that a little bit more? I know you said that it was the other graphic, I believe, but that you were at a higher altitude on the secondary point or waypoint, but then this area is a little bit more shallow. Can you just touch on the reasons why for that? And by shallow, do you mean like at a lower altitude than it previously was at?
So it's actually at a higher altitude. And so what we've discovered is the newest, thank you for the question. And our team really had to spend a fair amount of time analyzing what we were seeing. So I'm bringing, my answer is based on our current understanding and our interactions with the FAA Office of Environment and Airports, along with other representatives on the project team who support some of the narrow body aircraft. Again, I can't be explicit about which one we're looking at. So rest assured, we're getting pretty good feedback from folks very close to the aircraft and the operation. The primary difference we see today is ARCHI is typically 7,000 feet. Xylit is supposed to be 6,000. In this particular example, Xylit is 6,800 feet and ARCHI is 7. So we shallowed out the aircraft. We thought by keeping the aircraft 800 feet higher above Xylit, that we would have a consistent noise improvement according to AEDT BATA 4. What we discovered is that, at least in the way that the noise was being calculated in this kind of latest, greatest noise analysis tool that's been made available to us, is that because the aircraft is a little bit higher and it's not descending, slightly more thrust would potentially need to be used to keep the aircraft something closer to level between ARCHI and Xylit, and that's what you're seeing here. But then, because we kept the aircraft higher at Xylit, and then it starts its descent down, we gain more opportunities to reduce the noise, you know, as we get closer and closer to the airport. So an unintentional consequence, one that can be fixed, you know, but again, we're here to share the results, you know, kind of no sugarcoating, so to speak.
Sure. And I guess my last question is close in. You talked about thrust reduction. What certain percentages did you use, you know, in terms of thrust percentages? Did you use standard AEDT or did you use something custom? Just wondering what kind of level of modifications you made there.
Outstanding question. You're setting me up. I appreciate it. One of the really exciting things about the BADA 4 model, and again, this BADA 4 model has only been available outside of a couple of really specific university-led research initiatives, maybe for about a year at most, is that, you know, there's a way to use the model in such a way that we input the target landing weight of the airplane and the environmental conditions, and then we allow the model to determine how much thrust it thinks is necessary based on our trajectories and the profiles that we build straight into AEDT. So that's how we've come to these analysis. We're actually allowing the BADA 4 model to determine the amount of thrust that it believes will be necessary for the physics of flight in those particular segments. It was surprisingly sensitive to weight, to speed, to flaps, everything. So there's a lot of variables at play. But the good news is that how we set this up is that it's repeatable so that any other group or analyst like yourselves there at HMMH, I know you guys are world renowned for this kind of analysis. You guys will be able to repeat the same kind of results that we found as well if you'd like to experiment.
Okay, gentlemen,
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Can I ask one more question, Ricardo? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we're short on time.
Yeah.
Well, I would be happy to defer to Ann so Ann could get in her question. Ricardo.
Thank you,
Okay,
Justin.
thank you, Justin.
Really
Yeah.
quick. So
Yeah.
looking at the diagram in front of us at the airport, it starts making that sort of mushroom shape, but I can't see where what are the contours? What are they set at? Which one's 60, 65, et cetera?
Got it.
So-
And this is something we probably need to improve. And again, I'm trying to drive straight from our GIS platform where I've got way too many layers rendering at the same time. But I'm going to turn off. One thing you'll notice here in the background are these little white dots, just to really quickly elaborate. I'm sorry, Anne, I will get to your direct question. These are the existing noise monitors that have been established by the noise abatement team here at the airport. So we are
that's
also
8 and 9 right there, right, Bert? Monitor 8, monitor 9. Or is it 5? At any rate, where is the 65 decibel according to this?
You have to read the little black numbers right at the edge of that line. But
Yeah, I can't.
the
I'm having a hard
monitors
time.
we're looking at were right behind the runways where it says 62.4, 8, 9, 10, 11 is we go in shape.
Yeah, so in this particular, and again, we're looking at SEL contours in this case. Yeah, so 70, 65, 60, 55, 50.
Okay. And Paul, I don't think you've been to our ground-based noise, but we're trying to figure out why do we seem to get that low frequency noise in areas that seem like it shouldn't be. For example, Hillsborough, and I'm not sure all of which neighborhoods in Burlingame are affected. I look forward to seeing this on a scale where I can read it and try to absorb it.
And thank you for your comment. I'm taking notes kind of off screen because this was part of the reason why we didn't want to distribute necessarily a bunch of pre-produced graphics. But I also respect I've introduced a challenge here because my screen is an unusual resolution for today's discussion. But again, I reiterate our commitment to making these materials available to everyone in whatever is the most usable and convenient format.
Just because I'm a little fuzzy, so where the 65 decibel line is, yeah, right there, kind of right over the freeway. That's based on higher frequency noise, not based on lower frequency noise.
It's a great question, and I'm sorry, you were probably right at the limits of my technical knowledge on that. So
I would just make that an action item to help explain, because
Sure.
from my perspective, the low frequency noise is no longer being counted or is so averaged over the year that it's not a true reflection of what people are experiencing. But that
Justin
can
has
come to
the
a later
answer.
date.
Well, these are all A-weighted contours, so these are not.
Correct.
I would love to see
Correct.
something in the future that is low frequency based.
Noted. And back
Take-
to Paul.
Okay, I'm taking that note here very quickly. So that's that. We were just looking at the 2/8 right kind of examples. So I'll turn that off and switch over to what things look like for 2/8 left, just to keep things kind of moving forward. So bear with my system here for just a second. So 2/8 left, we didn't have, as you recall, as many opportunities to change the vertical profile for approaches to 2/8 left. But as a result, that means that many of the segments kind of match up to what's existing today. So as you might recall, I mentioned we had some decisions for 2/8 right about how steep or shallow we want things to be. For this example, because we don't have a lot of opportunity, we really don't introduce potentially any kind of new noise exposure kind of south of Eddy, but we do still potentially have these gains, you know, over the Palo Alto, East Palo Alto, and then coming into this area. And again, if we look at I'm sorry, was there a comment?
No, I'm sorry. I thought I was muted. Sorry.
Oh, sure. And then on, you know, when we look at things from ARCHI, again, 2/8 left, this again is another one of these situations where maybe making some decisions about which altitude and which trades we'd like to pursue could yield reductions in these very small changes in the purple area that we see. But I just want to point out, it is still, and I'm sorry, I need to change our procedures because now I'm on 2/8 left. That's better. Now you can actually see the approach procedures and where they're lining up. The concept here is that I just want to reiterate, if it doesn't look like a good idea to pursue one of these innovative concepts, we're not going to do it. Like, so, you know, if there may just be better designs that we need to consider to more evenly distribute potential noise gains. But right now, at least in the next 5 years, we're so constrained about what we can do for approaches to 2/8 left in terms of gaining altitude that we find a lot of our analysis to look something like this. 2/8 right, I think, which we were looking at just previously, we do see much more significant kind of changes in noise. Now, having said that, let's switch over to the 10s. And I'm sorry, I know we're only have a half hour left, so I'll just do this very quickly. And I'm going to, let's see, we're doing 10 right. Yes. Okay. So using the same methodology that we've been describing, you know, using AEDT, you know, 3C, BOTA4, allowing, you know, the BOTA4 modules to kind of do a lot of the physics-based computation, when you offset the approach by about 3 degrees from the extended center line, it does, as you would expect, move the potential noise for that single flight to a different area. So it means that you have, you know, less potential exposure to noise on this side of the approach, but it means that you now moved it a little bit to this side. So we don't take this lightly. This was not an exciting finding. And you know, this is where the challenge, I think, of looking at approach procedures on a kind of in isolation reveals maybe interesting information for us. However, on the flip side of this is that this approach would probably be flown maybe once a year, twice a year, something of that nature, but it would safely deliver aircraft on an autopilot coupled position down to the runway, meaning that we wouldn't expect too many missed approaches that comes out of it or repeated attempts, which has its own kind of benefit. So just kind of pointing out that's the kind of analysis we see when we look at SEL for 10 right and for 10 left. It's a similar picture. Again, this is the 10 left picture here with a.
If I could interrupt, Paul, just add
Go ahead,
a couple things. We've actually gone years without any 10 approaches. And currently, I believe Paul mentioned, there are no instrument approaches to these other than the GPS type. So these are most helpful should we actually get anything other than wind. We actually have a little weather with it, but or clouds. But typically, 10 approaches are very dry, very calm, and not calm, but very dry, very windy days.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Bert. So one thing that we don't have today is we do not have the noise analysis for the down the bay approach, and we don't have the noise analysis in this format, I should say, for the FMS bridge visual conversion. And the reason why we don't have those is actually similar but disparate. Our goal with our noise analysis was to show the difference between the closest equivalent approach that exists today and what these innovative GLS procedure concepts would look like tomorrow. So in the case of the FMS bridge visual, the current design to convert that to a GLS is essentially identical. And the introduction of the new waypoint is really just to try to keep aircraft more out over the water in particular. So we don't have any differences in anticipated noise between an aircraft flying bridge visual today versus flying the precision approach version of the bridge visual tomorrow. And so it doesn't yield anything kind of maybe informative in terms of what the change might look like. The same is true for the down the bay, but we have a different challenge on our hands there. And I'm just going to pull it up so folks can see. I've got it here. Turn this off. And I'm gonna turn on a layer, and let me just turn on the LMAX to 2.8 right, and I will turn off the SEL for just a second. And let's turn that on from ARCHI. Okay, so I'm just using this as kind of an example, but you can see, we know roughly where. Well, we know precisely the track that would be flown by aircraft that are flying the Bodega East down the bay. The challenge for us is we're trying to figure out in a single flight, what would be the representative single flight from air traffic vectors that we would compare this potential instrument approach to, so that we can use this kind of color shifting concept to help inform folks as they give us feedback about whether this is a good idea or a bad idea, or we need to explore further modification. So I think that's a critical piece for us. In that we're working right now with the TRACON to try to figure out what might be the single representative track to use as the basis, and once we get it, we will update the set to include those values. Just being respectful for time and wanting to open things up for questions, I'm going to go back to just really quickly, just slam through something really quickly on the presentation material. So on the deck that everybody I think saw, we are making changes to our anticipated timeline as we work with residents of the Bay Area. Again, we want to make sure that we meet our project goal of creating procedures that reduce noise exposure, and we want the feedback from this working group and from the residents. And however long it takes, we're going to continue to change our timelines. So originally, I think we had anticipated a slightly faster timeline for technical challenges. Here we are in November at the technical working group. If we continue on a good timeline, maybe in December, January, we'll be ready to publish the community flight procedure packages worth of information on the website for all residents to start downloading and reviewing. And then that would take us through January and February as additional opportunities to meet again with roundtables and technical working groups and continue to gather that feedback. If that timeline was satisfactory, that would put us to March. If we're struggling, we're not getting a lot of feedback, we think we need to consider different options, then this timeline is just going to continue to get longer, and that's okay. We want the feedback. We want to make sure we're doing this accurately. So we'll just continue updating this slide to make sure that, if we need more time, we're going to take it. We want to get this right. So this kind of gets me to this open question here. What we'd like to see, and I respect we've only got maybe 25 minutes left, is we're really interested from the project team perspective is what are the thoughts about the innovative GLS concepts we've produced. The second thing we'd really like to understand is additional formats or materials. We got some great feedback already about the difficulty in reading some of the contours, but we have Google Earth capable information, we have GIS capable information, we have flight inspection graphics. We want to make as much or as little available to this group in the community as you see fit, but you all represent residents, and we'd like to get your feedback about what's right and what's ideal. And then we're also still very open to finding out what are the best ways to get feedback from the residents. So I'm going to stop speaking there, and I want to just open it up to the chair about any other questions or comments.
Thank you for a very thorough presentation. You have a lot of information, a lot for us to digest. And I think that with this, we should go to the members of the committee to see if anybody has any comments or any questions that we want to go with right now. Any raised hands?
We do not have any raised hands from the committee.
Okay, so committee members, I'll give you a few more minutes and then we'll go to.
I see a hand now from, excuse me, Chair, from Justin Cook.
Say that again? Justin, go ahead, Justin.
Okay, one more question if I can, Paul. I just wanted to know if you did any time above analysis using that metric. Just curious if you looked at that, since you were looking at speeds and thrust and those things might have changed. Or if that's something that you would be willing to look into.
So direct answer, we did not just yet, and this is exactly why we're so happy to be here with this technical working group, because if that's something that you and the committee feel would be valuable, we're happy to generate that analysis and bring it back in a format similar to what we're looking at.
Okay.
Okay.
I just really appreciate. Sorry, just to clarify, really appreciate any guidance on quite specifically what
Sure.
that might look like. But if you want to email me offline, we can certainly take it that way too. Or,
sounds great.
And just as a refresher, I say me. Really, our primary point of contact here for our noise-related issues is Bert. So I'll work with Bert, Justin, when you have a chance to discuss this with him.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, any other members of the committee have questions? I'm sure there's some members of the public that are chomping at the bit. So having none, then we will open it up to the public. And again, we're going to limit it to 2 minutes. So keep your questions, and I will allow follow-ups if there's more clarification. But let's start with the 2 minutes and let's go. Angela, you want to open it up?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And as a reminder, if anyone is dialing in by phone, you may press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. And we do have 4 hands raised from the public. I will first call on Jennifer Landesman. And if I can remind everyone to please state the city you're calling from. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. As you know, Paul, AEDT3C and this amazing software that our federal, that our tax dollars have paid for allows for you to pretty much add any supplemental metric that is supported by the program. And one of those metrics is a time above with C weighting. So I will put this all in writing because the select committee recommended certain metrics to be considered by the FAA, but since this is the airport, it seems that you would be even more open to using these metrics. So one is the TALC, and I would say 60, because you've got to understand that farther out from the airport for the arrival communities, the decibel difference between our community noise levels when there's no air traffic and when planes come is much more significant. So we'd have to go lower, like to 55 or 60, and at night even lower. So TALC 60 would be one, and then number above metrics. If and so you probably, I think would be greatest to make the sheet available of all the metrics that are available. You're only looking at A-weighted noise metrics, but there are C-weighted noise metrics, tone-corrected perceived noise metrics, but I think that's just for aircraft, for equipment stuff, and then number above noise level metric. So in order for the public to be engaged, we have to actually understand the overlays. And I would like to see that information for the overlays and what has informed the FA to do a CADX for the overlays. So I think that information is really important, and I'll follow up in writing because this is for public outreach. I appreciated the comment that a lot of the other stuff is in Greek, but noise is something we understand. And thank you for asking what we need, and that's what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I will now call on Mark. And Mark, I just want to check in with you and make sure you need me to share the screen, because that will take me at least a few seconds. So let's confirm.
Yes, please.
Okay, give me 1 second, please.
Anyway, it's Mark Shell, Palo Alto. Hi, Paul. 2 questions and a quick statement. First question, it seems that vertical separation is the future for close parallel operations. For example, we see new .308 procedures on the 19s, and this slide shows GBAS vertical separation on the 28s. If this is the new separation model, won't 28 left have to be kept low for during Casper operations, as in this slide? That's the first question. Second, you use 3% GPA glide path angle, for example. Is this relative to a constant horizon, or is this from the runway? Obviously, that makes a difference when you get distances out like in Palo Alto. And now here's the problem that we see with the overlay. NextGen hit Palo Alto twice, first by concentrating dispersed traffic into a rail, and subsequently by actions to make the arrival stars higher. Because the localized intercept point near Facebook requires low and slow fixed altitude and speed, making Surfer and Pirate stars higher created late excess deceleration in the transition space between the stars and localizer intercept point. In other words, over Palo Alto and Bellhaven. Whatever the intent, these actions created more noise overall, and a noise shifts from upstream to downstream, and Surfer 5 will make it worse. Creating carbon copy RNP overlay of this as is like salting a wound. And temporary overlays become permanent. There's a history behind this concern. Today's simultaneous offset instrument approach, which GBAS will replace, was recognized as noise shifting over Palo Alto when it was implemented. The then airport director overcame this by assuring everyone that the shift would be temporary, and the Roundtable voted to approve the noise shift. Instead, the temporary became permanent. So our concern is, obviously, this transition space where we are is very, very noisy, was made very, very noisy recently. And I don't really want to see an RNP procedure to kind of turn this into permanent concrete. That's the concern. Thanks. Oh, by the way, thanks for using BADA for, thank goodness for the Europeans.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scholl. I will now call, we still have 4 hands raised. I will now call on, I will now call on Rob Holbrook, followed by Jordan Jackson. Rob, please accept this request to unmute your microphone, and if I can remind everyone to state their city they are calling from.
Thank you. This is Robert Holbrook from Mountain View. Great presentation, Paul. Thank you. Several comments. First, very quickly, I wouldn't focus on approaches that are used 3 times a year. Second, it would be very helpful if you could publish for the community's benefit the purple areas that were highlighted on chart 19 at a much higher zoom in, so that we have a better sense for how many streets are impacted, or how many tenths of a mile are impacted. It's very hard to tell from these high level things. It sounds like it's very simple for you to do that with GIS. The third comment, I'm not sure about BADA4, but I know that Jim Heilman, who runs the noise office, or at least the office that considers noise at the FAA, told us last year that AEDT version 4 would be better able to incorporate airframe noise, and that the target for that was 2022. My understanding is that airframe noise is about half the noise on arrival. And so getting early access to that, if that isn't BADA4, would be, I think, important. As you noted, the noise is very sensitive to inputs, and the same is true with airframe noise. I would also add that the nature of the noise is important. Are we going to be experiencing speed breaks? Something like that could be obscured by the charts that you've shown. And so tone and sudden increases in noise like speed breaks are important. Finally, I'd say that I am a bit concerned about how you're going to model the noise converting from a visual approach to a PBN-based approach, because I don't think that models capture well the fluctuations that pilots actually use to accommodate real conditions with visual approaches. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holbrook. We have 4 hands raised from the public. I will first call on Jordan Jackson, followed by Mary Jo Freeman. Jordan, please accept this request to unmute your microphone and begin speaking.
Hi, this is Darlene Yapley from Palo Alto. I'm using my daughter's Zoom account. At the October 7th roundtable, I was pleased that Paul Hanna supported meetings with other roundtables in cities. These are communities that will be impacted by GBAS, but are not members of the San Francisco Roundtable. I have followed up twice with the SFO and have not heard yet back. So please advise, especially after seeing the compressed schedule of the SFO gathering input by December, January, and reviewing that input in January, February. I applaud the comments from the last roundtable meeting by members Hurt, Hindi, Borgen, Schneider, and former member DeGray of Pacifica. They wanted to know the true impacts of GBAS. This means GBAS noise impacts. My input is for a detailed noise analysis that shows the delta in noise profiles. I think colored is nice, but I think we want to know the exact numbers. What are we talking about the increase and decrease over the communities from the perspective of people on the ground based on how aircraft actually fly? We know how they were supposed to fly. They were supposed to glide, but they don't actually do that. And so what we are interested, whether it's AEDT or a modification, is for you to incorporate actually the experience that we've had with NextGen. So please address questions such as, will a procedure that uses the bay more be in fact quieter before reaching the bay? Where are the speed breaks? Over the water? Great. But if over people, then it will be noisy. With steeper, higher descents, that will be, well, where will be the noise? Having shorter and steeper approaches doesn't necessarily mean quieter approaches over people. This has been misleading. As former member DeGray mentioned, we were told great things about NextGen. We don't want another NextGen with GBAS. The saving grace is that we understand that you're willing to work with us, and we hope to collaborate on these issues before implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now call on Mary Jo Fremont, followed by Jennifer Sunnyvale. Mary Jo, please accept this request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you, Paul, for the update. So I have some questions which I will submit offline, but I have 2 overall comments. The first is on the innovative approach for the 28 left. It assumed that the planes will go through side-by, probably because the FAA designed a partial Big Sur overlay. However, how can SFO submit a GBAS approach for a partial Big Sur overlay that, number 1, was not voted on by the select committee? They didn't vote to shift the Big Sur ground track to the east of the Menlo waypoint. They voted to have the old Big Sur ground track all the way to Menlo. Number 2 has not completed environmental review, and number 3 has not been shared yet through the FAA community involvement program. It's premature to propose an innovative approach on 28 left. Furthermore, the proposal is pretty much a straight line over densely populated areas. It's not curved to take advantage of the bay or commercial industrial areas. So we must require and ask SFO to look into truly innovative 28 left approach to reduce noise over residents by taking advantage of the bay and commercial industrial areas. We also need an approach that eliminates speed breaks over residents. And of course, it would help tremendously if the FAA allowed SFO to be innovative. My second comment is also on community impacts, following Darlene's comment. SFO said they will not implement GBAS if it's negatively impacting community. However, today's presentation doesn't really tell us what noise impacts to expect. The estimates are rough and they're unreliable. We don't really know by how much noise profiles will change. Are we talking 0.1 dB? Are we talking 1 dB or 10 dBs? And furthermore, the estimates do not take into account the aircraft configuration and speed breaks. So these are critical factors. So my question is, how can SFO submit GBAS approaches based on rough and unreliable community impact estimates? Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jo. I will now call on Jennifer Sunnyvale, followed by Lisa Matichak. Jennifer, please accept this request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. As many of the other speakers mentioned, there needs to be before and after contours done. Clearly, when NextGen was implemented, there were problems. And GBAS also will further concentrate flights. So absolutely, we need to see what was here before and what is proposed. That's not even negotiable. That needs to be done. The other thing is that when we were looking at slide 19, I believe the analysis is done on narrow body aircraft. And I wonder what would happen if these analyses were done on wide body aircraft. Would there be big changes there? So when that analysis is done, I'm not sure, we might need to be looking at additional aircraft there because narrow body may not be representative of what may actually be occurring on many of the aircraft. The other thing I'd like to mention is, and I know Robert Holbrook has mentioned that parabolic descents often can be a little bit quieter. And I'm wondering why in the case of many of these overlays and such, they're always using straight line descents rather than using some sort of parabolic descent. And maybe there's a reason why they don't, but my question is why not? And are parabolic descents potentially quieter and could be an improvement? So those were my basic comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. And really quickly, can you please state the city you are calling from?
Sunnyvale.
Thank you. I will now call on Lisa. Lisa, please accept this request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. This is Lisa Matichak. I'm calling from Mountain View, and I am a member of the Santa Clara, Santa Cruz County Roundtable. Anita Enander from Los Altos was also on this call until she had to drop off, and she's also a member of the Santa Clara, Santa Cruz County Roundtable. And I have a feeling she'd share the comments I'm about to make. And that is, thank you very much for this presentation. It was excellent. I learned a lot, but it also raised a lot of questions in my mind. And I think it would be great if you could do this presentation at a meeting of the Santa Clara, Santa Cruz Counties Roundtable or at the technical working group of that roundtable. And I'm sure we can figure out how to make that happen because you get input from folks who are not members of the San Francisco Roundtable. I wanted to understand in more detail, as was mentioned, the impact in the areas highlighted in purple. As Mr. Holbrook said, you know, how wide are those purple lines? What is the impact on our communities? So more detail on that would be really helpful. In addition to, I thought I heard you say that that could be addressed. And so I'd want to understand how, because it looks like there's lots of benefits of GBAS, but we certainly want to understand the impact of the changes on the communities as represented by those purple lines. I guess to that end, I want to remind folks, you know, I think we all have the sort of the rule that says we're not going to make changes that move noise from one community over another. And so that's why we really want to dive into those purple areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa Matichak. And Chair, I do not see any more hands raised from public members, so we can.
Perfect. I think the timing is perfect. That gives us a few minutes to get some comments or final comments from members of the committee. Is there any comments that anybody has?
I did.
Final comment.
Vice Mayor Schneider's hands raised a couple minutes ago, so I'm not sure.
Please, Vice Mayor, if you would.
To be honest, then I forgot what my point is. I think my general point would be with the GBAS coming in on 28, if as you look for it, you could try to figure out how the low frequency noise moves from that point. This goes back to a desire. When I first joined the Roundtable 5 years ago, SFO did a really cool 3-dimensional flight path. And I would like to see that for low frequency noise because the sound moves differently than high frequency. And I think that picture will help us understand. I am thinking, Chair Ortiz, that some of the noise Burlingame is feeling is coming from 28, but I have nothing to base that on. And we just approved a new hotel under construction. I pushed for as many absorption materials and trees as possible. But I think when we go back to ground-based noise, there's some other areas we need to look at for sound absorption.
I agree. That's a very good point. So thank you very much. Any other members that have any comments for to close up? And if we don't have any, then what I will do is my comments are, I look at some of the graphics and look at those purple versus green, and it makes me just think that we're doing some noise shifting. So I think it's really important that we understand and I think one of the speakers already brought this up, but it's important that we understand the changes in those purple areas versus the changes in the green areas. I think there is a good trade-off, but we need to understand what it is and understand what the impacts to those communities are versus the ones that we're alleviating. So again, my concern after listening to the presentation was that it appears that we're doing noise shifting and we don't want to, we wouldn't want to do that. But with that, if there's no more comments, Michelle, is there anything else that we need to do, or Angela?
That's it, but I do think that some follow-up with Paul about next round level of information, trying to drill down further into the purple areas by having blow-ups of the actual decibel levels overlaid with street and topography, so that we can really spend a meeting just focusing on where is the shifts in noise, and then having HMMH there to really talk about those details that he started to bring up, which was what is causing that and how can we look more closely. And I think Justin was asking for the time above analysis, which will help with some of that. And I think that's the next round meeting we really need to have, is blown up.
I'm sorry, there was a few comments from the members of the public that I think added to some of what you're talking about, other points that we need to add. I thought the air brakes comments
speed brakes.
Yeah. So we have a list of those comments. We will put them together for our next meeting. And wow, that was really
through the chair.
Everybody. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I
think we lost you. Okay, and it is almost
something or other.
And we're losing you. I'm just getting bits and pieces.
Well, let me try to get closer. But maybe at our next meeting we can talk about that new French plane, because I'm hearing it all the time now, and it's a new sound, and I don't know if there's anything we can do about it, but it's something new, and it's loud.
Okay, and this is relative to GBAS, or is this for the roundtable overall?
That's a good point. It might be for the full roundtable. It'll definitely be a ground-based noise action.
It's definitely ground-based noise. It's the Airbus 220.
Okay, so I guess so we would probably need to add that to the ground-based noise subcommittee agenda. And then when you guys have a chance to talk about it, then maybe bring it up to the full roundtable. Okay. And with that, you guys, I do have a hard stop right now. So I am going to have to adjourn the meeting, but I thank you all for your time. And I thank you. That was a great presentation. And thank you, the members of the public. You guys always have great comments. And the members of the committee, thank you for showing. And Mike, I appreciate your comment about speaking English, because that's one of my initiatives for this next year. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, because it was Greek to a lot of people. So
I know. All right.
everybody have a nice Thanksgiving for whatever it's going to be. So
You too.
Happy, safe Thanksgiving to everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And
For
I just
all
want
of
to
you
say,
too. Thank you very much.
really quickly, I just see Mark Schultz hands raised. So Mark, if you have more input, if you can please email the roundtable. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
bye.